you are not washed up. So we cannot be so, let's like committed to this one version of ourselves. Open your mind and your ability to evolve, and nothing really throws you into the fire to do that like motherhood. Growth as an athlete is exponential. It is not over when you become a mom.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast. Brianna Battles, I am so excited to have you on today. Selfishly, very excited since I am currently in a pregnancy stage of my life, but really excited for you to be able to share your wealth of knowledge with so many women who are either pregnant, postpartum, just athletes that are working through any of these phases. Because I know I have gotten so many questions and you are the expert in this space. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me again. It's great to connect with you during this season of life. Congratulations again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a weird season, and honestly, I feel like since the last time we spoke, there has been so much more information and kind of just like flooded the space a little bit more with just some more education around um, exercise during pregnancy, exercise postpartum, pelvic floor health. So I really want to dive into all of these things because pelvic floor health has really taken a backseat for so many years. It's worked its way to the forefront, maybe not as much as we would love it to. But I wanted to start out just by letting the people get to know you a little bit, what led you to this space, because you are the founder of Pregnancy and Postpartum Athlete, CEO of Everyday Battles. You are the master here. So what led you to this side of fitness?
Yeah, I had my first son 11 years ago. And even as a really well educated coach, like my background was in exercise physiology, my master's was in coaching. I had gone through every certification, I had been coaching at a lot of different levels and in different capacities, working with female athletes. It wasn't until I became a pregnant athlete myself that I realized the messaging out there was either you're really fragile and don't lift over a certain amount of weight, don't get your heart rate up, and just like really outdated stuff. And so people like myself would almost like rage against that kind of messaging by then doing the extreme. So like that was when CrossFit was also in its era, like that was 2013. And like we were seeing more CrossFit moms, and that was like becoming a thing, and more women wanting to train through pregnancy. And so then you saw the other end of that spectrum, which was like a full send approach to pregnancy. No modifications. You're a badass. And if you train really hard during pregnancy, then you're going to have a really easy delivery, and then you're going to bounce back and you're going to get right back into the gym and be like fit mom. So that was that era, which was pretty toxic in and of itself when I look back on that. But it was really easy to kind of gravitate towards that messaging. And even over a decade later, I still see that being a thing, but now it's accompanied by hopefully a little bit better information. But there's pendulum swings associated with everything, because even with more information, that doesn't always mean that it's good information or accurate information or information given by people who have more experience beyond their own personal experience. So even a decade ago, navigating those seasons as a pregnant athlete, it wasn't until I got really humbled by my birth experience. I ended up having an emergency C-section, and I felt like I just got really rocked by the motherhood transition in general. It was really a hard time for me because my expectations were, well, I'm really fit, I'm really healthy, I was really informed, I did everything quote right. And then I felt pretty defeated by the birth experience and by just how challenging postpartum was, adapting to being needed so much and at an extreme level when you're in those early months postpartum. And it was just really hard to acclimate to. And so I tried to use exercise as a way of like feeling like myself again. But it was really easy to do too much too soon. And I didn't understand any of the changes my body had experienced during that time because there was no talk of like core and pelvic health and diastasis and whatever it might be, any kind of pelvic health symptoms that were very much associated with pregnancy and birth. And it wasn't until I was like, God, like, why does my belly button look different? Why don't I look like, I just wasn't expecting to look like my body had changed, because again, the belief system was very much like if you're really fit, then you're going to be really fit after. And that might be the case for some people, but birth does physiologically change you. Like there are significant changes that happen to your body. It's a major transition in your life. And it doesn't mean that you're broken, but it does mean that you are different and there's new considerations to adjust to. And so it was through my own process that I realized what a disservice there had been for women that were looking to what I like to call pursue a lifetime of athleticism after the age of 22, because that's where a lot of our information and definition of a female athlete ends. It's like, well, when they're done being college athletes, they're not really like, we don't really work with them anymore. And maybe there's a handful of professional athletes, but well, they're not a majority of the population. But what we know is there's so many women that are doing CrossFit, that are powerlifting, that are competing in triathlons, that are signing up for running races, going to F45 or whatever kind of group fitness class. They're consistently participating in fitness, and they're also mothers. They're entering the stage of life where they're going to be thinking about getting pregnant, then they're postpartum, they're navigating a new body, and then they're navigating a new life and a new identity and a new routine. And then they're going to repeat that process likely. So, there just wasn't a lot of information for athletes like me. Nevertheless, the coaching professionals that I was like asking questions to, nobody had answers. No one like understood what the body had changed. It was mostly like, well, like you'll bounce back, or just like, it was more intensity, more load, get stronger. We kind of were talking about treating that process the same way we would um like do, I guess, under normal circumstances, but nothing about your life postpartum is normal. New body, new brain, new routine, new everything. And that led me down the path of kind of combining my background in strength and conditioning and coaching with everything I had then learned about core and pelvic health and the pregnant and postpartum population. And that led to working with a lot of women in my local community, starting a business there after I resigned from collegiate athletics. And then when my son was about a year old, started my business in 2014 and ran an in-person business until about 2020. And I had created like a hybrid model with my coaching. So I did have like online programs, because what I was getting was all these people saying, I wish you lived close to me. I wish I could go to that class, or like sending me long emails of what's going on with their body. And can you help me? What do you think about this? And I realized like I needed to be more accessible. So I created some online courses and fitness programs and just different products for that population, which then led to knowing, well, it needs to extend beyond like my voice. We need the coaching industry and the fitness professionals to be more informed and to have better information, so that this CrossFit coach, this yoga instructor, this physical therapist, this group fitness instructor can be what I am in their own community. So then I created my certification program for coaches and practitioners, which is pregnancy and postpartum athleticism. Created that in 2017. And now we have over 5,000 coaches around the world who are certified, and they're working with this population online or in their community, or a combination of both. So that was my really long winded answer for a little bit about me.
Well, that is just an incredibly successful story and always rooted in, that personal experience of like, this didn't work. So I'm going to make sure that this is not the experience for a lot of women. And, I'm so glad you said that and how you were humbled by your birth experience, because I know, so my sister usually does the podcast with me today. She's sick, but, you know, she was pregnant during that era
Mhm.
where there was so much like CrossFit messaging, and that's really trickled over. It's still very prevalent right now, because they're so hard on two camps of like how you're gonna do pregnancy right and do your birth experience right. And I know she was, unfortunately at the beginning of that, where this kind of don't modify anything. You're such a badass. You can work out during pregnancy just the same as you have this entire time. And if you don't do it that way, you're kind of like some type of failure in this space where the pendulum swung in the other direction. Um, so I'm really excited to kind of talk to you about, the balance in there, how we might be able to find some balance in there, because I know, even now, a lot of the feedback that I've gotten during my pregnancy is just like, well, you're just, you're such bad at doing everything the same. And it's like, I'm not actually doing everything the same. That might appear different for every athlete, but that's not actually how I'm going about my being an athlete and being a pregnant athlete, and how to adjust some of those things, and using the, just because you can, not doesn't mean you should,
Right.
because that is one of those like crazy things. But where to get that information is so difficult, because you try to go to your doctor and they say like, continue doing what you've always done. You're like,
Mhm.
okay, but you don't really understand what I've always done. I know early in my pregnancy, or in my second trimester, I said something about like, um, during strict pull-ups, I'm feeling this kind of pressure. And she was just like, you're doing pull-ups?
Yeah.
I was like, so I don't think we understand what we're talking about here.
You have to remember, like, that's not their scope of practice, just like it's not my scope of practice to give you advice on what stage of labor that you're in, or like how to deliver your baby, you know? So I think that we are wrongly looking to the medical professionals, because we wouldn't ask them how we should be like working towards a 300-pound PR on a deadlift. That's not who we would go to for that conversation. And again, because it's just not really their scope of practice, unless we're talking about contraindications to exercise at a really individual level. But that's not the greater conversation happening in the fitness community. But people love to default to, my doctor said I could keep doing it, and like that's almost their that's where they find validation in their efforts. But it's really short-sighted, and there's a lot of things that the fitness industry has really gotten wrong about training during pregnancy and postpartum, and the medical community gets wrong as well. And I've been doing this for 10 years now, and try to like create a business based on nuance, not over what people just want to hear, but over what they need to hear, so then they can at least make informed choices. Because what I got really frustrated hearing over time was, why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't I
Yeah.
know this could happen? Why didn't I know about X, Y, or Z, or all these different things? And I'm like, it's because we're not like really informed. We're not given context about what to truly expect from the changes our body experiences, and then how all of that influences our mental, physical, emotional health and experience. So it's really being able to like zoom out and have a bigger conversation about, these are short, in the big picture, short seasons, but really impactful seasons. They act as a catalyst for a woman's lifetime of athleticism. And if we care about supporting female athletes across their lifetime of athleticism, then we have a lot to learn and a lot to acknowledge about how they're approaching their training, and honestly their overall like lifestyle approach during pregnancy and postpartum.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good segue into one of the questions I had for you. What are some of the core and pelvic floor symptoms that are common in pregnancy? And like, how can we help?
Yeah. I think just basic body awareness is really what's key. Because when you're like have an athlete brain, you're really used to like pushing through and kind of dismissing a lot of things. We're really good at justifying, compromising, and compensating. Like that's what athletes are very, very good at. And during a season where your body is changing and it's no longer just about you, there's a lot more body awareness that needs to come into play. So it's almost knowing like, what are your predispositions? So we automatically know that you're going to have diastasis during pregnancy. That's just the natural separation of your abs at the midline. So your abs are not tearing that connective tissue of your six pack. Whether you can see your six pack or not, you have connective tissue there that separates your ab muscles. And as pregnancy continues, those muscles separate, and that fascia stretches at the midline to accommodate the growth of the baby. So there is no preventing diastasis, contrary to what social media tells you a lot of times. There's no preventing diastasis. It is an expected adaptation the body experiences during pregnancy, and it's amazing that that's the human design for pregnancy. But I think that there's a lot of fear because we have such an obsession with abs and changes to the stomach during, as women in general, most of us have been sucking in our stomach, and especially if we look at like a CrossFit community, used to working out with your shirt off all the time, and like there's a hyper fixation on abs. So I think it's really easy to look at diastasis as almost like the gateway drug to learning more about your body during pregnancy and postpartum, because diastasis, That's the expected thing. What is oftentimes unexpected is different pelvic health symptoms. So that could be peeing, like when you're lifting, or peeing when you're jumping. It could be peeing when you're sneezing, or even just feeling like you need to go more often. Those are all under the realm of incontinence. Pelvic pain. So that could be like a sharp shooting pain that you might feel maybe when you're doing walking lunges or step ups or getting in and out of a car or bathtub. Or it could just be like a dull lower abdomen ache. There's a lot of different pelvic pain experiences that can happen during pregnancy. And then pelvic organ prolapse. Sometimes that's a little bit more common postpartum, but we have to be aware of our tendencies and some of our predispositions during pregnancy so that we're not generating a ton of downward force to the pelvic floor. So, pelvic organ prolapse is when one or more of the pelvic organs shifts downward and can place a lot of pressure on the pelvic floor. An organ is now in a new position, and it can almost feel like a tampon is falling out, where you're like, something is wrong and you feel like you need to like adjust your vagina. And this might sound like, what in the world? And most people have no idea what that is until they know. And then they're like, oh shit, my vagina is broken. Something is wrong. And so again, these are things that, like, yes, we can be aware of. And yes, we need to know what our predispositions are. If you're somebody who has been like bracing and bearing down like this, and you do that all the time, and that's how you were taught to valsalva, that's just like what your tendencies are. If you're somebody who, you really squeeze your glutes a lot, maybe at the top of a deadlift, or naturally you kind of squeeze your glutes, or you suck in your abs, like, those are tendencies that we can kind of work on undoing during pregnancy to then set yourself up for managing core and pelvic health symptoms postpartum. Now, of course, birth has a million variables that influence core and pelvic health symptoms. There is no right way to have a baby, there is no best way to have a baby. Um, all birth can contribute to core and pelvic health symptoms and different experiences. So, some people are like, oh my God, I don't want a C-section, or I do want a C-section, or um, whatever. Like, there's just a lot of weird dogmatic belief systems around birth. But what we know is, regardless of how the baby comes out, the mother's body has gone through a significant physiological event through birth, the birth process, plus the 9 months of pregnancy. Therefore, to manage and improve core and pelvic health symptoms, um, or her the like likelihood of it, like, we can do things to help mitigate symptoms and really encourage that postpartum rehab, on that other side. So again, during pregnancy, it's just a lot of awareness, and it's a lot of adjusting exercise to, be aware of some of our tendencies, to understand what our quote risks are, so to speak, what we're maybe more prone to during pregnancy, so then we can make really proactive and informed choices with our training to give ourselves the best chance postpartum. Like, that's what it comes down to. It's like, this is one season. We have to be willing to make some adjustments, not because you can't physically do it, but because you want, it's so much more than operating out of our ego and in the moment of pregnancy. It's saying, what do I want to feel like 6 weeks postpartum, 6 months postpartum, or 6 years postpartum? That's the girl you need to be focused on, not the one right now.
Yeah. That's a great point too, and an ego reminder that a lot of times some of us as athletes just really need during pregnancy. Because I remember asking one of my friends, I said, like, well, when did you stop doing muscle ups? Like, it feels okay for me right now, but I'm feeling this kind of like, it's, giant sit up. So, like, the pressure in the middle really doesn't feel super comfortable for me right now. And it's not that I can't, but I'm just, and she's like, well, I kept going, so you'll be fine. And I was just kind of like, I mean, I could, but, like, for me personally, that isn't feeling super awesome. Like, there's just feeling like too much, like, center pressure.
Yeah, I
It
mean, and it is. That's the mechanics of the movement. There's no, even with like, well, if you do this breathing strategy or adjust this position, it's still a lot of force. Plus, we're adding height. Like, I just look at those situations with CrossFitters and literally whoever. Like, I work with every kind of athlete. I don't care what people like, what kind of choice
modality.
exercise they do. It's more of like, what's your motivation behind that? And if I'm looking at a pregnant CrossFitter who's doing muscle ups, it's not about getting better at muscle ups. It's that she's afraid to stop doing muscle ups because she's like attached to whatever that means about her and her ability as an athlete, what she's able to do. Because we have a million things that could like simulate what a muscle up does.
Yes.
There's a lot of different modifications. It's just being willing to, just like we would with for managing any other kind of like injury or coming back from being sidelined for whatever reason. Maybe you're just more deconditioned. Like we give ourselves more grace during those seasons, yet somehow don't want to do the same during pregnancy and postpartum. So
Yeah.
again, it's really changing the narrative because of what we've seen pushed so heavily within different fitness communities, not just CrossFit, of like be a badass. And we're doing it almost for the
Or you're
wrong
like
reason.
failing somehow, or you're
Yeah,
not
I
as
mean,
much of a badass, and you're like,
but like literally, you are the only one who cares.
Yeah,
Nobody else
it's true.
cares or thinks twice about it. So again, we're operating most of the time from a point of ego or comparison because so and so who was pregnant before, well, I know she did that, so therefore I should keep doing it. But that is not how your own growth and improvement as an athlete works in any capacity. So again, pregnancy and postpartum are really good like growth opportunities for female athletes because it forces you to look at your own bullshit. Like you were literally forced to like make peace with what are my real motivations behind training? What are my real problems that I've been masking with like my body image or maybe like some eating disorder tendencies of how my relationship with exercise, my relationship with how like what my motivations are because you're no longer training necessarily for performance improvements or aesthetic benefits. Like you have to make peace with I am training now for my health, for my mental health, for my baby, for feeling good in my body as good as I possibly can during this chapter. So again, it really forces you to separate what you normally would do or how you've typically what your typical relationship has been with training and your body and like re-examine what does it need to look like now to actually fulfill what the bigger picture is, which is being an athlete mom eventually, 6 months from now, again, 6 years from now, 16 years from now. Like, and then look, I'm way on the other side now. My youngest is 7. And I'm telling you, like, you are not washed up. It is not like your good days are behind you as an athlete. You can discover new sports, new ways to train. Like how I trained during my pregnancy is so different than how I train now because I'm like, I just like, I don't want to do that anymore. I like training this way now. Like you evolve and grow up as an athlete too. So we cannot be so, let's like committed to this one version of ourselves. Open your mind and your ability to evolve, and nothing really throws you into the fire to do that like motherhood.
Yes.
Because just because you're being like full send CrossFitter now does not mean that 5 years from now, that's how you're going to be approaching CrossFit or if you're going to be doing CrossFit at all. I could say the same for triathlon, powerlifting, running, anything. Like your growth as an athlete is exponential. It is not over when you become a mom.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. But you got to know, we are able to bring you this incredible content each week and talk to you about all of the pressing matters in health and fitness because of our successful TTSL workout program.
We have incredible coaches, movement demos, and just different cycles all the time. So we take the thinking out of your training every day.
If you would like to join us, please go to ttsldaily.com and pick out your package. You are going to love every day of fitness.
So this led into a really a really great topic that I think that I follow you on social media and that you kind of talk about a lot. And some of the phrases that you've used have been so helpful for me personally. Talking about the opportunities that we have here as a like this is a growth opportunity, like to become a more mature athlete. And I
Yeah.
think that mindset shift personally has made such a big difference for me. So I wanted to give you a second to kind of talk about that and just the different stages when we're thinking about like this is an opportunity instead of it's like a setback is what it's
Right.
kind of been framed for me in the
Yeah.
past of like this is a setback, like just ignore this time, get through it and then try to be a badass again or you're done or like so many different ways. But you said and it's funny because like in with one of my training partners, she was like she is not pregnant and she was just kind of like doing something with an injury. And I was like, well, Brianna Battles says like this is an opportunity for you to work on your athletic maturity. And she was like, I hate you right now. But it's on loop for me because I'm like, this is an opportunity for you to work on your athletic maturity, to look at some of those things, to look at your ego, what you really want out of this, and not just blindly go into this as like, well, I'm just going to be the most badass CrossFitter ever. So,
Right.
talk a little bit about how we can reframe our minds and ways to do that.
Okay, so like my little spiel that I say is athleticism does not end when motherhood begins, and it's different, and different is an opportunity. And here's the thing, like motherhood, pregnancy, postpartum, whatever, like your season of becoming a mother is oftentimes the first time a woman has had to experience different, like truly different for the first time in her life, because it's always been about like, well, I'm going to get better, I'm working for this, I'm training for this, and you haven't necessarily felt so out of control with your body until you become pregnant, because it's not just you and your body that you're training for, it's like the baby, right? So that alone is like, this is oftentimes the first time somebody has felt truly sidelined, where they feel so different in their body. And instead of looking at it like, what's even the point of training? Because some athletes feel like that. They're like, I'm usually training for like body composition improvement or performance. Now, like, what the hell am I even doing? And they're like almost like really unmotivated. Or on the other end of the spectrum of like just talking about athletes is the full send athletes that are like, pregnancy is not an excuse. It is not an injury. I'm going to keep doing this and doing that, and like proving something to themselves, their gym, and they're getting that praise and that clapping. And like that becomes addictive when you're in a season where where you're like, you don't have that self-confidence necessarily. So you're like seeking that out, whether you realize it or not. And again, all of that is super normal experiences for female athletes during pregnancy. But I say it's an opportunity because none of us have been taught much about our bodies. Like whether you are work in the fitness industry, and even if you're in the medical industry, you still don't really understand how our bodies change and their function beyond like basic reproduction and maybe sexual health. But none of us have been taught about like pelvic health, the changes our bodies experience, not just during pregnancy and postpartum. Like there's plenty of women who have not had babies who pee when they do double unders, who have been experiencing incontinence at a very young age, who, and now they're getting pregnant, and like, oh, well, that symptom that was like kind of not that big of a deal, or I didn't think it was a big deal, is now becoming a bigger deal. And we could say the same thing about postpartum, where they're like, well, yeah, I pee a little bit when I do this, or I do have um, like I am experiencing prolapse, but they like don't really want to do a lot about it. I mean, there's so much self-awareness and help and things that we can do proactively during pregnancy and postpartum to really rehab, to not do too much too soon postpartum. Because again, it's not just about these seasons. It's like, what do you want to feel like when you're 40? What do you want to feel like when you're 50? When now we have hormonal changes, there's perimenopause, there's menopause, and there's just aging. Our bodies, our pelvic health is influenced by a lot of things. For most women, pregnancy and postpartum is the first time that they've maybe been made more aware of their pelvic health, and then have that opportunity to have more body awareness, more body education, so they can be really proactive now on behalf of this lifetime of athleticism. So then you're not caught off guard during perimenopause or menopause when you're having pelvic health symptoms, and you're not duped by the medical system that tells you, well, just get surgery, or just keep peeing, or here, just like use a pad, or the CrossFit circle of like, it's fine, everyone pees when they do double unders, and it's not a big deal, wear black leggings or whatever. Like that's kind of the messaging that we get, or just get surgery, just do this, just do that, instead of like addressing the root cause proactively and then managing it more strategically postpartum.
You said a lot of things there. I did want to kind of bring in some of those athletes that are not currently pregnant, that are not necessarily even postpartum, like directly postpartum, and just kind of give them some attention. Because sometimes what I've heard a lot from women who have been kind of like watching my journey is a lot of shame or regret that they feel that they didn't do during their pregnancy or directly postpartum. And I just want to give them, first of all, the shame, the regret, it's riddled with so many women, but it's so unfortunate. I just want to give them some space, and what could they maybe get from the podcast? What's some advice that you could give to them who are still kind of like looking at that season but are just like, well, I'm not currently pregnant, I'm not postpartum, what is it that I can do?
Yeah, like if they're on the other side of postpartum and maybe they're reflecting and like feeling one way or the other about their experience. I mean, I'd say that you're not alone. Like that's how most of us have felt. It's like I wish I would have gone about this a little bit differently. And when I look at the magnitude of motherhood, I can say that about so many things that I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done that differently. I wish I would have known that. And like there's always going to be things that we look back on with more wisdom and perspective that we've gained through the years, through access to more information. And also like it's never too late if you're feeling like um you're managing a pelvic health symptom. There's still opportunities to have improvements and to rehab that and make progress. It's not over, even if it's different. It's not over. There's still a lot of different opportunities to improve our quality of life and our experiences as women, but also our performance as athletes. So you did nothing wrong, regardless of like however you trained. If you feel like you trained wrong, no, you didn't. Like there are so many factors that influence somebody's experiences. So many factors. We can't blame just one thing. Like, oh, I went running at 4 weeks postpartum and that's why I have prolapse. Well, like maybe, but it's usually the sum of a lot of different things that can contribute to any one symptom and experience. So that's what I would say to them. And it's not over. There's still a lot of opportunities. And if you need that help, happy to help.
Yeah, I've heard that specifically so much too. It's like, well, I have prolapse, or I have, because I did this too soon and I just have so much regret. And I'm like, you know what? There's so many factors that could influence that is just not, riddled in so much shame. Is there anything talking about core and pelvic floor, is there any exercises or any one exercise that you suggest for every woman hoping to provide support to their pelvic floor, that what should we be doing on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because a lot of people, like a lot of like medical providers will say, well, like just do make sure you're doing Kegels and like you want a strong pelvic floor. But honestly, most female athletes absolutely should not be doing Kegels. Like they don't need more tension. We are already high tension humans with tight pelvic floors. So I'd say the majority of us, pregnant, postpartum, or not, need to learn how to relax our core system, how to down train the pelvic floor, because it's really tempting to hold, or not tempting, like it's just really natural to like hold a lot of tension there. We have been, if you guys are listening and you can stand up, like if you suck in your stomach, I want you to suck in your stomach as much as you can. Pay attention to what your butt does when you do that. I know that sounds weird, but like when you really suck in your stomach, you're going to feel like your butt kind of like tucks under and also clenches. That's creating a lot of tension in our system. What have all of us been subconsciously doing our entire life? Sucking in our stomach there, especially if you were an athlete, especially if you're a CrossFitter and no shirt on. Like you're obviously not just like letting everything just like hang out. You're always holding some amount of tension in your core. Now tension is not the enemy, but knowing how to undo some of that tension is really key. So it's like instead of living high tension all the time, squeezing our abs, or if you kind of clench your glutes a lot, you hold a lot of tension there, then it's being able to like down train that, let that go. And we can manipulate tension by changing how we're breathing and some of that pressure distribution, timing that breath with our movement, and then adjusting some of our, like, I call it like different positions within the movement. It's not just looking at the form, it's looking at our position in movement. So a deadlift is a really easy one, I think, to imagine. But most of us, have been taught when you stand up out of the deadlift, we're going to like shift those hips forward, kind of squeeze your glutes, essentially to like not get no repped. But we really need to pay attention to not continually training that overdrive, those hips forward, because that's that tucked position, which can create a lot more tension on that pelvic floor. So we really want the core system to be able to lengthen, which happens on inhalation. And on exhale, the pelvic floor has a co-contraction that happens in response to that exhale. So again, so many of us have been taught to hold our breath in Valsalva with like literally everything instead of just for really high loads. So we can manipulate the timing of our breath, and then we can manipulate tension through position and breathing. I teach, like, I know this is kind of getting like nerdy. Um, and I teach this like really extensively in my certification program, because so many people want, well, just tell me what exercise to do. Just tell me like the series of 4 different things and how many reps and how many times a week to do. That is not how it works. Your core and pelvic health prehab and rehab can and should be integrated into your training routine. Like, it should not be this separate thing. It is how you are moving your body. It is how you were training day in and day out that is going to be create the sum of your efforts. It's never just like, you're not going to improve your knee injury by just doing 3 sets of 10 of like quad extensions, right? Like, that's not how you're going to get better. Maybe that helps a little bit, but it's the sum of how you're squatting and deadlifting and your running mechanics and your progressive overload. It's all of those things, right, that really help you improve a knee injury. And we have to look at the same from the core and pelvic health perspective. So I do teach that extensively in the certification program. I call it the PNPA principle, because it really helps you understand all the different variables that influence your training and how we can be really proactive during pregnancy and really help mitigate symptoms postpartum by applying some of those principles.
That's incredibly helpful. And I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the breathing techniques that we're taught when we're lifters are based on the mechanics and needs of a male athlete.
Yeah.
And when it comes to, and that's kind of how our coaches that haven't gone through your program are also coaching us,
Yeah.
is to kind of like, hold your breath, like, push to the bottom of your squat. And that's putting a ton of pressure on the pelvic floor. And
Right.
just even thinking about some different ways that you might be able to breathe through your movements that is beneficial for a woman's body,
Yeah.
or a pregnant or postpartum body is
Yeah, I
very
mean, we just
different.
have different anatomy. Like, we have a hole at the bottom of our core. That's something that Shantae Cofield said, and I thought it was like, that's so perfect. Like, we just have a different place where pressure can escape versus a male body. So therefore, it's not that like we're fragile and we can't Valsalva. Yes, you can. And the mechanics of how you Valsalva, where you're sending that concentrated pressure, that can be something that we manipulate for the female body. And frankly, pregnant or not, symptomatic or not, I've seen my female athletes and myself, like, I haven't had pelvic health symptoms, but I feel so much more powerful when I'm lifting heavy, when I've changed how I Valsalva. Before, I think we're taught to either big breath holding, you kind of see that chest run up and you kind of like press out into your weight belt or out into your midline. So you see that elevation of the chest here, or you see that setting down into the pelvic floor, like you said, it's like a bearing down where they're like here, and then they set and they kind of like send that pressure down and they create that tension in the lower abdomen, ultimately generating a ton of pressure down. And then we're loading it, and then we're working against gravity, like with the barbell against the gravity. And that can be really hard for the pelvic floor to absorb that force and then produce force, right? So we need our bodies and our mechanics to work with us. And when we are able to redistribute that pressure, we have a lot more oomph and a lot more power and a lot more support. The pelvic floor is a group of muscles, like muscles that can help your performance. It's not just about continence, it's not just about symptoms. It's about like, how can we leverage that for performance instead of like essentially straining it? How can we leverage it to work for our performance while also, preserving it to the best of our ability? We can't control everything, but like, why not have more awareness around ways that we can like keep our system healthy and, also benefit from a performance perspective.
Yeah. Working with us instead of against us.
Yeah.
Like, we
Yeah.
have to work around this pelvic floor instead of
Yeah. I mean,
working with it.
I think it's just hard because a lot of people haven't been taught that. It hasn't been a consideration in strength conditioning. It's not like we have research on this. Like, no, we have such minimal research on women in general, less research on pregnant women. And when we talk about pregnancy exercise, they're not looking at like this kind of exercise. So
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
people want to create a lot of different justifications and stories of like, well, my wife did this, or I squatted like this, or I Valsalva, like, cool. But like, there's not these sweeping generalizations that we can use. So I think, again, it's understanding how does the pelvic floor function? What are my training motivations and incentives and goals? What do I want my life to look like? What do I have to prove now? Like, what can I adjust now proactively to hopefully give myself the best quality of life and performance long term?
Brief interruption for all you pet lovers out there. You're in luck because our drop this week is just for you. So, we have 3 new patterns that are for your furry friends, and they are so incredibly cute. Check them out, constantlyvariedgear.com, and let me know which one is your favorite. Yeah, that's a great point and brought up something that I did want to touch base on. Um, and just like there is not this generalized that this understanding of, even if you kind of like tell your practitioner like, oh, I'm still working out, I my midwife was very aware that I was still working out, and then at one of my last visits she said like, are you still walking? um and my partner was like, what is happening right now? He was like, she does not understand what you're doing. I was like, we're just moving on. Like, we're just gonna move on from this. But there is a lot of like stories, and what I wanted to bring up was influencers who have gotten pregnant or had a baby, and then therefore becoming kind of experts and
Yeah.
sharing their and I'm not saying just like sharing their experience, but then giving advice to other athletes based on their birth experience, their birth plan, and what they are doing during that stage of their fitness, and just kind of giving that generalized advice to everyone else. Why should we
Yeah.
be kind of cautious about this type of influence?
Because it can harm you. Like, I mean, it is so gross. That's like, it really discredits the work of like having integrity within the fitness industry. And I have seen and heard it all. I like, there's been major influencers that have bought my programs only to duplicate them and put their own spin on it and use it. And then they just speak out of context. And even if they've taken a certification, most of the time the certification like only covers so much. You need to work with this population in real life. And I would say the majority of people that are selling anything pre and postnatal online, whether they're selling a certification or they're selling a program or they're giving advice, they are not actively working with this population. They do not have experience coaching this population. Therefore, that's not somebody you should be taking advice from. Like, something I tell all of the different coaches that go through my certification is like, you need to get in person with real bodies and start working with them. It is not enough for you to take this certification and be like, oh, like, you're going to know more than the majority of people, but also your impact and your credibility comes from what you're actually able to do, not just spout off and repeat. Because that's what we see on social media is people that just like yap. They yap and they have a lot to say, and they're mostly just copying or riffing off of what somebody else said, instead of like coming up with their own original like content or their own discoveries through coaching. Like, that's how good coaching works, is like, you have your foundation of knowledge, but then you get better because you're working with people, you have interactions with people, you have different conversations, your own beliefs and education get challenged when you coach people. And that's problematic across the fitness industry as a whole, but I feel like moms are absolutely marketed to, and can be taken advantage of. It's also the era we're in of like essentially a lot of millennials getting pregnant we've all grown up kind of on social media, came into that in your like 20s and 30s, and like that's the population of them able to speak and sell to them, like we're using this as a tool, for good. Like, for me it's been a great tool, a great opportunity, but with that comes like just a lot of problems.
Yeah. I have said that too at the past. I was like, it is a great opportunity. There's a lot of deficits. There's a lot of positives. There's a lot of good information out there. There's a lot of terrible information out there. But, when it comes to women, pregnancy, postpartum, it's just like every pregnancy is different. Never mind every woman is
Yeah.
different. Your needs are totally different. So even if like, we're sharing like this is my experience, right? But like this is definitely not to be used for another person's experience. And I think something that I have learned during my pregnancy is everyone is very ready to tell you what
Yeah.
they did what is going to work for you, regardless of like knowing anything about your lifestyle, your body, how you're feeling. They're just like, this is what you should be doing because this is the right thing to
Right.
do. And it's like,
Yeah, it's kind of like the few things where people have these absolutes, like where
yes,
their opinions are being served as like absolutes and rules. And I'm like, this is actually the most nuanced season. Yet people are saying, well, I did this. I deadlifted 300 pounds. I ran this marathon at 6 weeks postpartum, whatever. Like,
yeah,
and therefore it would be fine for you too. But no, like everyone's experience is so different mentally, physically, emotionally, their symptoms, their likelihood of symptoms, their birth experience, their mental and emotional health, their support situations. So many things are different, so we cannot like lead our messaging with like rigidity and statements. We have to ask like open-ended questions, and then again, lead with body awareness and being informed, and know that like just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should, because it might not serve you right now. So like train on behalf of who you want to be long term, which does not have anything to do with what your physical performance is during pregnancy. You could be sidelined your entire pregnancy, puking, not exercising at all, and still have a beautiful lifetime of athleticism ahead of you. Like it literally does not matter. Like exercise is a benefit for sure, but it is not a guarantee of any kind of specific outcome. And it doesn't mean that if like you didn't have the pregnancy experience that you preferred, that you're going to be so set back postpartum. It does not work like that. Most of the times that serves as a really good like reset for your body and your training.
I am so glad and thankful that you said that. I have, one of my very good friends who is currently also pregnant, but she has not been able to work out at all. She feels
Yep.
terrible. She feels sick. She's like totally sidelined. And I know she's feeling like so much shame and comparison. And I'm like, you are doing amazing. You're growing a human. Like, this is such short. I know it doesn't seem short sometimes, but when you're rolling around like a rotisserie chicken, but like it is such a short period of time.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you said like that there's a lifetime after this that
There's so
is,
much ahead. There's so much ahead. And I get it. Like it is hard because it feels like a forever season where it's not about you. You're like, my body is changing. And then
yeah,
postpartum, it's like, well, you're breastfeeding, you got a baby on you. You're not like, your sleep isn't your own. Your body isn't your own. Your life isn't really your own. And you do feel sidelined. And that doesn't mean that you stay sidelined. And it's also okay to be sidelined. Sidelined, that happens for good reason. That
yeah,
happens to heal. That happens to reset. That happens to redefine, and like all of these things serve as opportunities. So we cannot let that like get in the way of what you're going to be able to do. And slowly you can start to dose in ways to feel more like yourself.
yeah,
Dose it in. And it might not be what you were doing before. It might not be the what you want to be doing, but ultimately over time, those little doses get bigger and
mm,
more. And you get a little bit more freedom. You get a little bit more capacity to feel like yourself again. And again, it's not for nothing. You could have everything go wrong or everything go right. And like,
yeah,
regardless, you still have this awesome lifetime of pursuing whatever your athleticism looks like ahead of you.
yeah. I did want to touch a little bit more on peeing and pelvic floor. So you wrote a book called The No Pee Cheat Sheet. And I know this is a common occurrence for so many women on so many different levels, whether it's during pregnancy, postpartum, um, at all stages, even that aren't
Yeah.
postpartum. But what are some of the what are some of the biggest mistakes that we're making, and when should a woman kind of seek out help for this issue, and what should we do if pelvic floor PT isn't covered by insurance and it's not something that you can work in on a regular basis?
Yeah, I would say at least getting a one-time consultation from a pelvic floor physical therapist can be really, really helpful. Downloading that no pee cheat sheet, because I mean, it's just like a free ebook. It's not like anything crazy. But again, kind of tying back to what we talked about earlier with like understanding what your tendencies are. If you're holding a lot of tension in your glutes, making some positional and breathing adjustments to how you're jumping. If you're peeing when you do double unders, for example, there's a lot of little things that we can troubleshoot from the outside in that have really big impact. And again, even if you can justify a one-time session to a pelvic floor physical therapist, just to get an idea of like, if, especially if you're postpartum and maybe you tore or you have prolapse or something, like it's really helpful to have that kind of perspective that otherwise you're just going to be guessing,
Yeah.
you know, like you're just going to be guessing. So it does not mean that you have to have these continued visits, but it might be worth a one-time investment if you can finagle it. A lot of different options there. There's can be telehealth too, if you're somebody who just like can't access a PT. But again, that could be like just really helpful context for what your specific body needs. And then ultimately, so much can be done from the outside in to make some improvements.
Yeah. I love that because it's just like there are so we're all, even, as a specialist, you're like, we're guessing if we
Yeah.
can't get in and see exactly what your body is doing, which just like it makes so much more of the argument for like any random person who told you what happened with their pelvic floor is completely irrelevant to what's happening to yours. Like it just doesn't translate in that same way. Is there anything that you are still seeing from so many women that you just want to yell from the rooftops when it comes to pregnancy, postpartum care, pelvic health, core health, or just training as an athlete? Is there anything that you are consistently seeing that you're like, I just want everyone to know this?
That's a good question. I think just knowing that, like, that it's not over. Like you're not washed up. So that urgency that you feel to like keep maintaining what you were doing, or that like, or you're just feeling like you're washed up, or you're feeling like sidelined, that it is not over. And who you are as an athlete right now is going to change. And that is going to be such an enjoyable thing when you allow yourself to have that experience. When you hold on so tightly to who you were and that previous identity, that is self-sabotaging.
Yeah.
When you give yourself that permission to evolve and like discover a new version of you as a mother, as an athlete, in this body that you've been given this incredible opportunity, like that's when you experience the reward. Like you will self-sabotage by trying to hold on to a previous version of yourself when this one who's waiting for you on the other side, like there's so much enjoyment and happiness there. And your life will be a lot easier when you let go of her and introduce yourself to the new version of who you're becoming.
I love that. I know that that's going to resonate with a lot of women. That has been a struggle and something that I've focused on during my pregnancy. And that I had to just kind of be like, I gotta let go of that. I like
Yeah.
when I was just like, I don't want to let these people beat my scores. Like, the, what? That doesn't matter. Like, that doesn't matter. Let go of that. So one last thing that I just wanted to give you the opportunity was: is there any one piece of advice that you'd give with women, or how can they hear more from you? I'm definitely going to link a lot of these in the show notes just so they can find you very easily. But is there anything that they should do right after this episode, or where they can hear more from you?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on Instagram. It's at Brianna, Brianna.battles. That's actually my real last name. That's not just my Instagram handle. It is a question I get a lot. um,
Perfect.
or the brand page is at pregnant.postpartum.athlete. Website is the pregnantpostpartumathlete.com. I have a ton of different free resources there. Have a fitness program for pregnancy, a fitness program for postpartum, and then my certification program for coaches, practitioners, or honestly anybody who wants to learn more just for their own body, for their own experience. That's pregnancy and postpartum athleticism. And I'd love to have you become a coach there. I also have a podcast. It's the Practice Brave podcast, where I have a lot of different guest interviews and solo episodes that talk about all things related to being an athlete mom through pregnancy, postpartum, and beyond. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I know this is going to be so helpful for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you.